All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Combat to Commerce podcast. This is our second episode. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Josh Parnell. He works with me here at HRC, a good friend, used to be his career manager, and now we're trying to do this together because we've got mutual interest in a lot of business opportunities in the area, which he'll talk about later, especially when we discuss or have a conversation with his spouse, Jess. And then I have a guest of honor, Mr. Aaron Termain, Lieutenant Colonel retired. I used to work for Aaron back when I was at Northcom, and I will tell you there was never a dull moment. This is a man of many talents, spent most of his career in the special ops side, can literally get anything done, but when he does, he likes to let you know that he did it and be funny about it. So it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, our second episode, and it is great to see you again after probably about 10 years, 8 to 10 years since the last time I've actually saw you. So it's great to see you, and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, welcome.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Josh. I think this is great. Your combat to commerce theme. This is very important. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you. And yeah, the purpose, what we're trying to get after with this combat to commerce, as I was going through my transition out of the Army, going through all the different TAP classes and trying to look for good news stories for, general soldiers, officers, what have you. I really wasn't seeing a lot of resources out there that really encouraged you to pursue entrepreneur opportunities, various government jobs, and just everything that's out there. So I know as I'm transitioning out now, I've had a lot of hesitancy, some doubt about what's going to happen going forward. Working with someone like Josh and seeing all the stuff that his wife is doing as an entrepreneur and real estate agent and everything else has encouraged me. And I think that this fills a needed gap in the space where it can encourage both officers who are and soldiers and NCOs who are still in the Army, still active, to pursue entrepreneurial routes, career paths within the Army and outside the Army, and any opportunities that are there. So with that, Aaron, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So as I came in, so believe it or not, I enlisted in 1987 in the U.S. Navy. I went through Navy basic training and then went through A school right there in San Diego and became a hospital corpsman. And that was transformative. I came in under what was called the Temporary Active Reservist Program. So I came in, did basic training, did A school, did a very short utilization tour, and then was sent right back to Arizona, where I'm from, and then went right into college. So I was drilling over the weekend with the Navy Reserve, and then ran into some guys from the Army ROTC program at Northern Arizona University. And to be quite honest with you, it was literally a question like, "What are you doing this weekend?" And I go, "Nothing." "What are you doing?" He goes, "We're going to go rock climbing and shooting guns." And I go, "That sounds fun." And the next thing you know, I'm in the Army ROTC program, and the Navy, looking back on this, very kindly let me go and allowed me to pursue this ROTC program. So now I'm in the NAU ROTC program, made it through transition and got commissioned, and then became a medical service corps officer. During my time, hey, that's my son Ty. During my time in there, but I was working, I was drilling with an Army Reserve Armor unit, the 8th of the 40th Armor, and I was a cadet platoon leader of a tank platoon. So I thought I was going to be an armor officer. And then the Army had a different idea, and I became a medical service corps officer. And so one thing led to another. I graduated, commissioned, and became a medical service corps officer. Then I'm at Fort Sam Houston, then Fort Benning, then Fort Bragg, and that's how all that got started. So that was great. I mean, I wished I could say that I had this all planned out, but I sort of gumped my way through college. And hey, do you mind? Sorry.
That's
Live action. So gumped
Yeah,
my way
that's
through college and then ended up as a commissioned officer. So
awesome. Awesome. Go ahead, Josh.
Hey, I'm sorry about that. That was a bit of a delay. No, again, appreciate you being here for it. So, as you described, like going through and your like the desires that you experienced coming in, is there any? I mean, even though you didn't get what you desired at first, I'm sure was there any regret at first of what you wanted to, of what you were being slotted as, or anything of the sort? Would you have any other way of how you came in? Like,
So
I think before you described about being medical, armor, infantry, and all that stuff. Can you talk about that a little bit?
yeah. So yeah, there was, quite honestly, we're 30 plus years removed from this. I saw myself as a combat arms officer and thought armor, infantry, that was the direction I was going to go. The Army made a decision and I got into the Medical Service Corps and I didn't know anything about it. And I think the reason why they chose that was because I was a medic or I was a corpsman in the Navy and filled that slot and moved in. So I didn't know anything about Medical Service Corps. But as I got into it and I got assigned to, 24th Infantry Division at Fort Benning, one thing led to another. And one, there's a lot of opportunity. And two, I was also allowed to maintain my credentials as a medic. So I kept my EMTB, I earned my paramedic license, and so there was a lot of utility to that. And then as we moved into training, I was able to use those skills to train my own medics, for combat casualty care. And quite honestly, as I really got into the mission of things, it was very important because, to be honest with you, and later as I matured and became part of this, what could be more important than caring for the casualties that we incur during combat operations and training and equipping and ensuring that we have the capability to bring these soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And I say it that way because my last few years in the Army were joint, so I didn't know who we were actually supporting. But what could be more important than ensuring that we could provide the absolute best care to bring those guys and girls home as in the best shape as possible? So the training, the equipping, the pre-mission deployment training, all those things, it became a very important aspect to what we all need to do. So while, to be quite blatantly honest, I wasn't quite sure about this Medical Service Corps route, but towards the end, I was very glad that I was given this opportunity to be put in the position that I was in. And it afforded me a lot of opportunities that I don't think I would have had I been given another branch, to be quite honest with you.
I think, when we met at Northcom, I believe it was your first assignment outside of the special ops community in quite some time.
That is correct.
And following that, I definitely have to say, you were selected for a battalion command of the Warrior Transition Battalion. And I highlight that because not only for command, but also the things you did as the commander of the Warrior Transition Battalion were, I thought, absolutely amazing. And I think it ties in a lot to what we're doing with this combat to commerce, where you had soldiers who were transitioning out of service with obviously some had some very significant conditions coming out of combat, and you were able to put them into a place in front of employers, get them involved with various programs, which really, no doubt, had a dramatic impact on their post-military career. Can you talk about that, and maybe what lessons or what leadership skills or communication skills, coordination you had by working on the soft side for so long, where you're working joint and you're kind of an independent operator and trying to bring people together from different walks of life to achieve a goal. Can you talk about that, what you've learned and how you utilize that as a WTB commander?
Absolutely. So the great thing, coming from the unconventional warfare side, it changed the trajectory of my career and life in so many different ways, because what they value is, can you think independently? Can you make decisions? And when you make mistakes, can you admit to them? And what do you learn from it? That's real. I mean, it's the adult learning model. And I was really surprised, coming from so many years in the conventional Army, that I was allowed and afforded the freedoms to do these things that, I didn't expect I should have had that freedom for. So leaving that environment and then moving into and being selected for the Warrior Transition Battalion at Fort Carson, which was a completely new environment. These were new units with a vague mission set at best, I would say. Take the most wounded, injured, ill soldiers, and how do you care for them? And then within the tenets of the Warrior Care Program, how do you get them either primarily rehabilitated so they can return to the force, or more than likely, which was more times than not, how do you transition them back into civilian life because they don't meet medical retention criteria? And that was a much more difficult challenge than it was to rehabilitate and return to the force. Because now you're not just dealing with soldiers. So you're dealing with their families, and you're not just dealing with their immediate families, you're dealing with parents, brothers and sisters. So you had to take into consideration a very comprehensive look on the individual that was in your battalion. How do I support this individual's needs and desires and goals? How do I help support their family or extended family? And how do I get them to where they need to be? So the sort of thing that I would visualize, and great question about how does this translate to non-warrior transition battalion soldiers, but how do we create this bridge for active duty soldiers and their families? How do you create this bridge to have them transition from active duty into our communities? So wherever that community may be, because many of my soldiers, they weren't staying here in Colorado, they were going to wherever their home station was. So how do you tie them into resources, to career opportunities, to career training, to wherever they want to go? And then simultaneously, how do we develop these real rehabilitation programs to get them healthy enough to transition? So these soldiers were going through significant, if you can imagine, like, what are the most stressful things in life? A move, a change in jobs, a divorce, a child, those sorts of things. These soldiers are going through 4 of the 5 most stressful things that you've got. They've got a health challenge. They're potentially moving. They're losing their current job. They need to find a next job. And then how are they going to support themselves, support their family? So we're dealing with the vast majority of the major stressful markers in anyone's life. And then on top of that, add to the fact that you were leaving the service, the Army, and we handled Marines, we handled Air Force, we had everybody. But let's just talk about the Army. You're leaving active duty Army, which is a very protective lifestyle, to be quite honest with you. I mean, you are insulated from the real world in so many different ways. Even if you've only served for 4 years and get out, or you've served for 30 years and get out, that transition is very challenging. So trying to accommodate and develop an individual support plan for each of those soldiers and families, it was very challenging and difficult. Unfortunately, I had a very good cadre of officers and NCOs that helped me do that. And we were very successful with the 600 some odd soldiers and families that transitioned through the Fort Carson Warrior Transition Battalion. And I would have to say that we were very successful in helping these soldiers. Not 100%, unfortunately. But as I watched each of these soldiers move through their transition, it was enlightening. To me, I learned a lot as we helped them, as I saw that my time to transition was coming as well. And I very arrogantly thought that, hey, I've been wearing this uniform, it's fine. When the time comes, I'm going to walk out and move on to whatever's next. Until that window came for me, because all of us, we reached that time. The Army will tell you, or life is going to tell you that, hey, you can't stay in any longer. And that time came. And I will say that I went through exactly what my soldiers went through. And I was very fortunate to have all the experience of being a commander of Warrior Transition Battalion to share with myself and my family as I proceeded through that. So it's very difficult. And I was very, I didn't have that perspective about transitioning out until I became a Warrior Transition Battalion commander and saw, and not only saw, I mean, these individuals that were going through a transition, they weren't going through by choice. They were in the Warrior Transition Battalion because circumstances led them there. They were wounded in combat. They were injured in training, or they were grievously ill. And of all those things, I will tell you that the most eye-opening situations that I dealt with were the soldiers and the families that had to deal with cancer. And we're all young, we're all healthy. I never thought any of us, we don't get cancer. And yet here at Fort Carson and the 6 states that I supported, there was incidents of cancer that I had no idea that we were dealing with. And we weren't anything unique. So before these WTBs were stood up, how do we care for these soldiers and their families as they went through, life-changing therapies, and none of them were successful. So anyways, as I saw what all these soldiers and families are going through, I tried to learn as much as I could, try to get that in, because after battalion command, it was my turn to move out. And I will say that it was challenging for me as well. Even though it was very challenging. Did I answer your questions?
Oh yeah, no, you definitely did, and that tied into a lot of the stuff.
The WTB was life changing, and I could go on, but it was very fortunate to have that opportunity to command that battalion.
Yeah, no, I can see how you saw the lessons, as you said. You said arrogantly, kind of felt it would be no problem as you transition out. And I think I felt some of that this past year. Even when I was, I felt like I'm okay with money. I'm pretty good with money. But as I was sitting in those transition classes, and it could be a 1-year service member, private who's getting out, all the way through a 30-year colonel, who were all in that same room. talking about finances and realizing how much you don't make on the outside, or how BAH or housing allowance is not taxed, and your subsistence and everything else. And there was a lot of faces in the room that were like, wow, this came up quick, and I don't know if I'm prepared. So I think having you solve that was, and then what you did for the soldiers in the WTB was, very helpful for them. And then also on your side, probably help you prepare more as well.
Can you say about our transition at Fort Carson? So this is great. So you're right. And so the Army transition program, they are geared, because the vast majority of the Army, they're that Joe that enlists and gets out in 4 years. And that's the vast majority. That's what we do. And understandably, the resources and focus has to be on that individual. So then you get, like guys like us that spend 20 plus, maybe even 30 years. So at our transition program at Fort Carson, I think it was day 3 or day 4, this lady says, all right, it goes, all you lifers, let's go in this room. And we sequestered, all of us over into this other room. And it was great. It's like, yeah, we're trying to do our best to help support you. But the model that we're using on how best to support long-term, or how best support career Army service members, based off long-term incarcerated prisoners. And I thought that was hilarious. They're finally getting released into the wild, and we all thought it was hilarious. Like, yeah, so we're moving to the halfway house. They're gonna let's go to, grocery store. We gotta come back, like Brooks from Shawshank Redemption. Like, I thought that was hilarious, but she was completely serious. After we got to thinking about it, we're like, yeah, I can kind of see that. There are parallels,
That's great.
That's a good way to put it, though. That is a good way to put it. The
long-term incarcerated prisoners.
Yeah, I could definitely see, like, you brought up a lot of good points, though, like about like the Army humbling us as we go through. Like, they're always, like, as like even myself and my path, like we're going through, there's a lot of type A personalities, but you're like, there's no doubt about it, you've had a great career after hearing through some of the things that you've done in the military and whatnot, and all the vast differences and whatnot. But even in each one of those roles, you have a way of being humbled, like going into the WTB command role, that was different, and just seeing different circumstances that they go through in it. So I know it gets very taxing, but I do like that. Almost brings up a good point. Like, how do you find those? Like, how do you find those? I always hear this rumor, that always goes in the military, of just when they focus in on skills, we have all these resources that you use in the military as far as your resume to set up your next military-esque job. So it's cool to put like airborne or air assault and all that other stuff going into it, just to get. But like when you go into the civilian world, obviously it's a little bit different on those things you want to capture and those skills. I guess it's more like, this is kind of a hard question to ask, but what do you think were the best type of skills that you can, like, that, in those predicaments where you tried to help to the best of your ability, and I get it, everyone has their different nuances, but what was the best thing, or what was the type of skills you would encourage folks to, to emphasize on their resumes and whatnot, even yourself as you go through, and have that translate, over the civilian side and stuff. So, I don't know, for me, it seems tough, like you said, it is definitely like a prison, or not a prison, maybe brought that term, but like incarcerated type thing, and you go out into the wild. It's scary times when you go into it, and you have to actually go like, all right, you don't have the reassurances that, hey, you're going to be here for 2, 3, 4, or 5 years, at a location, you're going to pick up and move to another unit. But
Correct.
I don't know. I guess what things did you focus in? Like what did you think that was for skills? What did you kind of hone in on to better, prepare you to go in the civilian world?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, like how do we translate our military experience to civilian understanding? If that's correct. And
No,
I will
absolutely. No,
go ahead.
no, it's not spot on. This South Carolina education only goes so far.
Yeah.
So that's me with my big words.
So a couple things about that. As I was getting out, a lot of guidance, everybody has different opinions. And they're like, if you put like company commander, battalion commander, they want you to put, chief executive officer. But you know what? The fact of the matter is everybody knows what that means. I mean, there are very few civilian people, even though, we truly are, the 1%. But the understanding of military hierarchy and the structure, it's pervasive. I mean, it's very rare. They may not know what a battalion commander is versus a company commander or brigade commander, but they know commander. So I don't necessarily think that you need to put like chief executive officer, those, do that sort of minimalism of dumbing it down for our civilian folks. I would also say that one of the things that I did is, and I got guided this, I didn't come up with this at all. I don't want to take credit for this idea, but I created a resume and I shared it with anyone that would read it. And I offered their a constructive criticism of how to craft it, improve it, and whatnot. So I sent it to, current active duty officers. I sent it to retired guys. I sent it to 100% civilians. And then as those things came back, I saw a lot of, oh, that's a great idea. And I would incorporate that. And other stuff, I'm like, I'm not going to accept that. And then that's how I'll bet you at least 24 or more individuals looked over my resume and helped me craft and hone it into really what it is today. So, and now I've been out for about 8 years. And even my previous job as I was the director of the state of Colorado Veteran Community Living Centers. So I saw a lot of resumes come through. And I'm reading this stuff and I'm with a civilian board, no one has ever served with me. And we're looking for positions, like leadership positions across the 5 homes. And what I saw was people understood what a company commander was, what those sorts of things. They understood that. So I don't necessarily think that we need to, water this down to the point, to like, company commander, CEO. I mean, because what if you put company commander, CEO? I mean, they don't have a perspective of what a company is, versus a battalion versus a brigade. So just commander, that implies leadership, that implies, and then when you see the next position, like, oh, well, they were successful as a company commander. Then you see the next level and on and on. So I don't necessarily agree with the changing of things. I think our civilian counterparts can understand that. But as far as skills, what we're looking for, and particularly now, currently, not so much the formal certificate training degrees. We're looking for general leadership and the ability to make good decisions. So how do you lead, and teammanship? What's your decision making process? Can you make good decisions? Can you make decisions independently in complex environments? And then your analytical thinking that leads to those decisions. And then what kind of teammate are you? Can I get along with you? And that's a very challenging proposition, even especially today, because then you get into a lot of the divisive, political environments that we're in. And you're like, can I work with you? Can you work with us? And that's a very difficult and challenging thing that particularly people from the military, I think, have trouble with because we're mission and task oriented. And I will say that coming out of the Army and moving into my first civilian job, that was a very difficult transition, is that I didn't see the sense of urgency. Even though we're caring for veterans and elderly veterans and families that had some very critical healthcare needs, lifestyle needs, getting them into proper housing, medical therapies, all this sort of stuff. And I didn't see my civilian counterparts having the same level of sense of urgency that I did. And that caused some friction, to be quite honest with you. I'm like, we're dealing with people's lives. And not only that, but me being a veteran, I'm helping other veterans. I was one of, I was the only veteran amongst many, and I didn't see the sense of urgency of that. So I had some friction with my teammates and with my leadership about that lack of sense of urgency. So we'll caution folks that as we leave, uniform, and we're very mission driven, we're going to walk into environments that, these people don't share our sense of urgency and, mission driven sense. So sorry, I got us off where we were talking about, but so.
No, I thought that's a great point. No, I've heard that from a lot of folks, about urgency and whatnot. And I think that takes some, growth even on, our side, the military side too, of just trying to find that equal balance and stuff. But I've definitely heard that a lot. But you did bring up a good point. Like, I mean, it's funny because like when you go around to the military, I know it sounds funny. It's almost like they encourage plagiarism to an extent, right? If you get policies, plans, and whatnot,
Correct.
You do that stuff, and you're doing that even when you go out to the field. Like you talked about sending out your resume and whatnot. But when they were doing that, like when you brought it out to your civilian counterparts for them to like look over and address and kind of give you some insight, did you think did they, in almost a weird way, it's like, oh man, you can also do this. Did you know that you can do this? This is like a surprising thing that got put up to your way, and they can capture it, and like, oh yeah, I'm pretty good at that. Like computers, maybe, I don't know.
I mean, it was great. Everybody that I sent my resume to, they were super supportive. And they were very glad to help out. And it's been great because on the converse side, now that I've been out for a little bit, I'm getting those individuals sharing their resumes with me and, make some edits and some recommendations on that. I found everybody super helpful. Now that was, I got out, I was transitioning 2015 and then got out February 2016, all pre-AI. Now, I mean, you can't, because I've actually done it. I fed my resume into AI and asked it like, hey, what do you think about this? And it actually came back some really good suggestions, that I'm like, if I move on to another job, I need to take a look at that. I would stress, however, to anyone transitioning out now, that's a good way to do it. I would highly recommend putting it in the hands and in front of the eyes of actual individuals who have transitioned out of the military before you take that as an AI option as gospel, because there are so many nuances that I learned. So, for instance, a career NCOIC, Army NCO, working at UCCS, took a look at my resume because there was a director of military and veteran affairs there that I was really interested in. He took a look at my resume and sent me a lot of constructive criticism on it, that he said, if you want to get even considered for this, this is what you're going to need to add to it. And it was interesting because I don't think that if you did it on a computer, if you let AI take a look at that, you were going to get that insight on what he was saying working in that environment. You wouldn't have gotten those type of bullet points. So I really recommend folks share it with guys like us, and then some other folks out there completely separated from the military, and get those critiques back. So it was powerful. It really helped me out with all that stuff. So
2 quick points on what you just talked about. First, with AI, that's how I wrote Josh's evaluation, and it wasn't
all
pretty.
said sponsored by on each one of the comments.
It wasn't good. So if you don't have anything to add to it, you kind of leave the computer to like fend for itself. So if you don't accomplish anything, it's hard to get anything written from AI. But the second one that you brought up, and one of the points that we want to make with this podcast, not just, veterans, current active duty who want to talk about their careers and kind of give a perspective for, we're both 70 hotels, yourself as well, the medical operations officers, career paths we've taken. We've all done different things, from SF to Josh. He was SF. He's a 10th group, and did a couple other things. Mostly my fault being his career manager. I did a unique path.
They're all opportunities. They're all
opportunities.
Right.
We also are looking to bring on spouses who are entrepreneurs who somehow, they've supported their spouse throughout their career and made a career of their own. And then also what we want to bring on is business leaders or hiring officials or people in leadership roles on the civilian side, whether it's military or civilian, because what you just said about how you're looking for that leadership, and I got it. You're a commander. This is what it means. Okay, look at the next job. Okay, you're successful. You got a next higher up job. Looking for the right people, not always looking for the most talented, but a talented individual who's also great to work with. I think you retired before you implemented the Army Town Alignment Program. It has its ups and downs. One of the things I do like about it is over the last 3 years in the position I've been in, I've been able to interview new career managers to come to HRC. And I've interviewed a lot of talented people, a lot of great people. And it was hard to make cuts on who we select. And the deciding factor every single time, because as we interview, they're all great. But the deciding factor every single time was, do I see myself working with this person because they're a good teammate, or are they an extremely talented officer or NCO who will come here, they'll get the job done, but maybe they hide the answers of the test from their teammate to make themselves look better? Or do we take the person who's a great personality, who's a team builder, who can mesh in any situation, who can work with the field? Because in Josh and I's case, we both are at this point career managers for doctors who have options to get out at any time and make triple the amount that they make in the Army. So having that ability to talk to doctors, talk to other medical service corps officers, and work them through some of the challenges they're facing, work with teammates to find out, hey, how do we do this? And then at the same time, helping train those new career managers. And the way HRC is set up, and you wouldn't have known until you got there, it's a cubicle farm, and you're all sitting across from each other and next to each other. And you're all within your branch. And you just stand up and you're like, hey, Josh, I need help. Or, hey, and then even though I was, Josh is a Raider and our senior Raider, we're all in the same cubicle center. So unlike having a battalion commander who is behind a closed door and usually a secretary that's between them, you got to have that environment where you're comfortable working with your boss right next to you, and also within your teammates who are all, again, super talented majors, all competing, but at the same time supporting each other. So it's encouraging hearing what you're saying as a hiring official and looking at these resumes and your thought process going through, because I will tell you, as a 70 hotels medical operations officer, it is daunting as you look at job descriptions outside of the military about what the requirements are for the job, what experiences, because a lot of the times you don't think when you first read it that they translate. And working with a bunch of doctors who know that they're going to get out, they're going to be a doctor anyhow. It doesn't matter. But for us, and for me, it was very daunting on how do I translate this as a planner, as a operations officer. How do I leverage my leadership experience, and one of the biggest things that I've tried to do is just get my foot in the door. Just, we always tell each other as medical service officers, right? You need to make sure that you have a seat at the table for the plans and operations, MDMP, because if not, someone else is going to do it for you, and you're going to be left out. And so you just keep pushing, you keep just being that person who's there in the mix until you're proven your worth, and then you have a seat. And so for myself, that's kind of what I've been doing is, hey, I'm going to get this interview. I might not be selected, but I'm going to make it hard on the decision maker to not select me, because I'm going to try to do everything I can through communication, through teamwork, through, I think one of the biggest things in our career, especially as medical service officers, is selfless service. Because your main career goal is, like you mentioned earlier, is evacuation and take care of patients off the battlefield and take care of those soldiers. From point of injury all the way through rehabilitation, recovery, whatnot. And so talking to you and hearing you say that, it's very encouraging. And those are the same type of people we want to bring on. Because it's easy when your peers tell you, or a colonel tells you, says, hey, don't worry about it. You're going to be fine. You have a very strong resume. No problem. But when you're applying for jobs and you're faced with, hey, I get out in 6 months, it's not as easy as it's as it's relayed to you throughout your career.
I agree. So you guys brought up quite a few things. So last thing you said. So as a medical service corps officer, plans, training, operations, security, right? What we do in order to fulfill that mission of ensuring that we have the resources, the personnel, and the right training and equipment to treat and evacuate casualties from the battlefield. That's a simplistic version of it. But what else goes into that? How do you make all that happen? And looking back after almost 29 years of doing this, I mean, it's a complex skill set. Like, how do you make that happen? Relationship building, budget, training management, time management, ensuring that you, public speaking. How do you get your non-medical combatant commander to understand that you need this time, space, budget, equipment in order to properly train your medics and providers in order to be able to deploy and accomplish this mission? And it's very difficult at times to convince those individuals to do that. There's a lot of skill sets that go into that. So yeah, very simplistically, I'm a 70 hotel and this is what I do according to my job description, but how are you successfully accomplishing that? And it takes a lot of relationship building, communication, nuance if you're working in the environments that we've worked in order to accomplish that. So there's a lot of skills that go in there, to be, if you want to be good, and if you want to be good, that means you want to be successful at fulfilling your mission. And that's making sure that you get grievously injured individuals off the battlefield back home. And there's a lot that goes into that. That I think a lot of folks, other than us, maybe some other folks, I mean, I've had some really, really good commanders that got what we were trying to do. But it's a challenge and a lot of soft skills in order to accomplish these things, to be good at it, to get your medics, to get your providers what they need. But and going back up from, I just listened to you guys. So the teamwork part, that's incredibly important. Not only teamwork with with your medics and providers, within your team. But again, teamwork. Again, it every so often we get to work in a uniquely medical unit. To be quite honest with you, I've only done that once. Every other time, I've been a medical element within a combatant command. And at best, we were, third, fourth on the list of priorities because we want to shoot, move, communicate. That's what we want to do. We want to find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, and then continue to target. If we absorb casualties during that, then I don't want to say it's an afterthought, but it kind of is, because what I'm looking for is I'm looking for bad guys. I'm looking for targets as the ground force commander. I got these guys over here that if I absorb casualties, they're going to take care of it. So how do you convince that ground force commander that these are things you need in order to be ready to be able to accomplish that? So the teamwork part, not only integrating with the command structure, but integrating with, the folks that are actually hitting those targets, and integrating yourself with them so that you are not seen as a burden. You're not seen as a sea anchor, that you're an enabler. And that sort of skill set can translate in so many different ways, both inside the military and outside, which, again, going back to what we talked about, what are our skills in the military? How do we translate that to the civilian world? And that can be difficult. Again, I just talked about how I don't think we have to water it down as much as what initially I was told, but we do have to translate that, communication, training, resource management, all those things, teamwork, into translatable skills that civilians need. And be quite honest with you, and again, it may sound a little bit arrogant, but to be honest with you, being on the civilian side, we do those things better than the vast majority of our civilian counterparts. And quite honestly, we are in very ambiguous environments, that we've had that train us to be able to adapt to different environments. Whereas our civilian counterparts, they're kind of stovepipe, like I do this and this only. So anything outside of that left and right lane, they're very difficult. But going back up to one other thing, and I wish I bring my wife down here, including the spouses. As a Warrior Transition Battalion commander, the spouses had a lot of say. And we even stressed this with our soldiers that we were treating with their individual care plans, is that it's not your care plan, it's your family's care plan. If you're married and you have a wife, you have kids, or you have a spouse and kids, this isn't your care plan. This is their care plan. It's everybody's. And they have a voice in this because, which I like your route about this, our spouses need to be a part of this discussion because they have to live. And if we're doing our jobs as husbands or as wives, if we're doing our jobs properly, then we need to be consulting, because we can't be the sole decision maker in these things, because these decisions affect the entire family. So, and what you said about the spouse / entrepreneur, I'm not an entrepreneur. Like I couldn't start a business with your hands. So, but my wife might, and I think that's an important part. She has much more of an entrepreneurial spirit than I do, and I think maybe some of our other soldiers do. But those are all good points that you guys brought up about, how do we educate the civilian world about our skills? How do we illustrate, and not just us, not just 70 hotels. I'm talking about just anybody coming from the military. How do we translate our communication, teamwork skills, and into so many different aspects? And I will tell you that I am discriminatory in the fact that when I see resumes for military folks, I I'm defaulting to those guys. I want to hear what they have to say, because it's going to be hard pressed to find an individual who has spent any time in uniform that will have a difficult time integrating with any sort of diverse team. So they're good. We're good at it. We've dealt with it.
Well, so Aaron and Josh, we're coming up on about an hour. Time flies, and I honestly, we probably wasted a lot of time when we were in Northcom talking all day, and I could do that. I could talk to you all day. I love hearing your perspective. I love hearing your stories. I loved our climbs up the Manitou Incline. Not so much the way down. Those are always, especially when there was ice and you told me to put spikes on my shoes. But dangerous. But I just want to wrap up with maybe one more question, and I would really like to see, now that you've been out for a few years, you've had all the experience that you've had, the family, everything that goes into it. You've a great career, transition to another great career. You have a great family. What maybe closing words of wisdom or recommendations would you have for soldiers thinking about transitioning out of the service, or currently in the process of either separating, not as a retirement or as retirement? What any kind of closing recommendations you might have?
I would recommend this. So when we were at Northcom, we were allowed to go to the Air Force Academy's transition assistance program. And I did that twice, actually. And it was fantastic because the Air Force Academy was geared towards career officers and career NCOs getting out, which was fantastic. I know that not everybody is going to have that opportunity. We're very fortunate in our proximity and the fact that Northcom, or the Air Force Academy, allowed Northcom officers to do that. But what I would recommend anybody, captains, I would say, and sergeant, staff sergeant, sergeant first class, if you're going to make this a career, you need to go through a transition program now. Take the time, go and sit through that class, because I will tell you that sitting through that class, because I thought I was getting out from Northcom, and then I got selected for battalion command, but I wish I would have had that class midway through my career, because it would have changed my perspective and thoughts on career trajectory, retirement planning, all those sorts of things. And admittedly, though, even though I would have done that midway through my career, I wouldn't have been married. I wouldn't have had kids at the time, but it would have given me a perspective of, and better allowed me to prepare for that retirement and that transition as I approached it. So I recommend that to anybody. I mean, if you're hitting the 8 to 10 year mark, go through the transition program and just sit through it, CLEP it, or audit those classes and get some perspective of all the things that they're talking about, retirement planning, DAV, disabled American veterans. I can't tell you how important. I mean, again, I took this all for granted. I thought, those guys they're logging all my stuff and my med records and whatnot. And for the most part, they did a very good job. But as you approach the end and you got to turn those med records in, I mean, you got to make sure that you're vigilant in those things, because the benefits that you have upon exiting, they're not given to you, they're earned. And unfortunately, many of them have to be documented in order to be earned. So I still do a lot of work with volunteer work with veterans, and helping these folks get reevaluated, get benefits that they've earned, those sorts of things. These things could have been alleviated had you been a little bit more aware back in the day, and I wish I would have been more aware. I've been incredibly fortunate as I transitioned out, and even today, I could not be more grateful for everything the Army has done for me, everything the VA is doing and currently doing for me and my family. But not everybody gets that transition that I had, and I would like to help them out. I'd like to give them the heads up, and then again, if you didn't get a good transition, you need to reach out to folks like us. You need to reach out to veteran service officers, DAV, and other folks in order to help out, because veterans have just an enormous network of support out there that many of us don't take advantage of, to be quite honest with you. Both while you're on active duty, you have a network that you can reach out to for guidance, mentorship, etc. But once you get out, that network doesn't go away. And those people are out there. We are out there. And people senior to me that I still reach out and talk to, they're out there to help out. So we have an enormous network that we need to take advantage of. So I would want everybody to understand that, not be afraid to reach out for that through various means, veteran service organizations, DAV, VFW, American Legion, etc. But you need to reach out and let other vets help us, help each other, because we got some smart folks out there that can really alleviate some issues. So,
well, I love that. So Josh, these are the kind of conversations, sometimes we would have, Colonel Termain and I, and that was my first experience. I had just left company command and I went to Northcom. So I was a captain in a 4-star headquarters, totally lost, still like nervous about being around lieutenant colonels and colonels. And Colonel Termain, when I met him, I was like, I can do this career. And he's been someone over the years that there's always a person or two that you run into in your career. And I've always said I've been blessed with great leaders throughout my career. But, Colonel Termain has been someone who I can call or text or whatever any day, anytime, could be 6 months between discussions, and we can have a great conversation. And I think you got a lot of that today when through this podcast. And I've always admired you, admired your career. I've always thought that if there was something that needed to be done and it was impossible, you could do it. And I tried to, throughout my career, think through how you would have tackled a problem, how you would have taken on a challenge. And I've tried to implement some of the lessons learned that I've had from you. And I've always looked to you to any good thing that ever happened in my career. You were like the first person I messaged. And so it's leaders like yourself who I'm absolutely thrilled to have on this podcast, who I know genuinely cared about us while we were in and working together, care about after you've gotten out, and you continue to care about the veterans in your community and everyone. So it's been truly an honor to have you on here. It's been, again, like I said, you were the first person I thought of who I wanted to have on this podcast to highlight what you do, what you've done for the community, what you do for your family, what you do for soldiers. And so thank you so much for coming on. And again, I'm just truly blessed to have known you. And Josh, if you have anything else you'd like to comment on as well.
No, thank you so much, sir. And all these things matter. When we have discussions like this, we talk so much about the Army and how to be beneficial to the Army, but sometimes it's always glossed over. Like, it is true what they say, like the Army comes and goes, and, we just that's important too, to talk it over. And I think the thing you brought up, whether you're, even myself, I'm 15 years in, and sky's the limit. I don't know what that means, if it's a 20 year or 20 plus, but I think what's beneficial is just like your point. It's just to carry on. It's just, hey, it's never too early to start thinking about it, getting your spouses involved and whatnot. So, all kidding aside, Joe talks about you all the time. And And I also look up to Joe as well. So, and yourself now too. So I really appreciate the time you coming out and just talking to us. I think it's going to be extremely beneficial as we, continue to put like highlights on this about transitioning out. So really want to thank you and your efforts and what you've done, in and out of the military. So I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys. I think a podcast like this, it's important. We can't do this enough.